Today's guest on the Winning Teams podcast is the great Rocky Romanella. Now, there is a name to conjure up Hollywood and movies and New York and New Jersey, and he hails from New Jersey. But Rocky has got a great story to tell. If you're an executive on the way up and looking to become a leader, then his story is just enthralling. He started absolutely at the lowest role in UPS and became a senior executive and did some extraordinary things along the way. If you want to learn what it takes to be a successful senior executive, if you want to know what it takes to always have the attitude of what you can do and where you can add value, well, then this is a really an interview worth listening to. He's had a fantastic career. What Rocky shows us is how to be a really effective leader, how to make the progression through the ranks to become a very senior executive, and how to live a life that is of value and contribution to your people, to your team, to your family, and all around you. So it's really worth a listen to and to really hear the words of wisdom that trips from Rocky Romanella. If you want more information and more goodies, then go over to my website, www.johnmurphyinternational.com. There's plenty there for you. But in the meantime, sit back and enjoy Rocky. So, Rocky, all the way from New Jersey, you're very welcome here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, listen, this is great. I mean, I said you're the founder and CEO of 360 Management Services, but that really does not tell the story. You have had a long and successful career in your progression through UPS, and you might just kind of fill us in a little bit on that.
Well, thank you very much. So I started at UPS June 15th, 1976. So I'll give you a little bit insight as to the age if you do the math, but I was working my way through college. And so UPS had part-time opportunities, and it was a way for me to work my way through school. The interesting part is I went to college, ironically, to be a high school history teacher and a baseball coach. And as I was working my way through UPS in those early years part-time in college, I realized that those leaders that were the most effective were those who could get their people to connect the dots. And so for me, I never gave up my teaching passion. It just went from the classroom, more traditional classroom, to the business classroom. And I felt as if I was a good teacher and a good coach, and building world-class teams, you have to coach those teams. I felt like I could get my fix of coaching and teaching on the business side. And then UPS had a promotion from within policy, which I took advantage of and worked my way through the organization and spent 36 years and did some very interesting things at UPS. Some of the more non-traditional things that UPS does. For example, we purchased mailboxes, et cetera, rebranded to the UPS store. I had that as a direct report. So I learned franchising and also got a chance to work with some wonderful entrepreneurs and really have such great respect for entrepreneurs. And then we purchased over 20 companies and built UPS Supply Chain Solutions around this side of the world for UPS. So retired, got recruited to be a CEO of a telecom company, had a sale, and then I started my own company. So I guess the biggest thing I fail at is retirement.
You failed at retirement. And you're continuing to fail at retirement.
Oh yeah. I got to tell you, you want to see a weird look I got. The first day first time I retired, I said to my wife, Debbie, so what are we doing today? She goes, I don't know what you're doing. You haven't been around for 36 years. We'll figure out what you're doing. So I guess I couldn't follow around the food market. So I said, okay, let me start doing something else here.
Yeah. If you want your marriage to last, then you've got to find something to do on your own because she's managed just fine without you so far.
Oh, absolutely. Well, one of the things we talk all the time in business about value-added solutions, and I found out what's not value-added is when she gives you a list to go to the supermarket and you bring back more things. It's not value-added. She looks at it and says, "Why, did you think I forgot something? Oh my God, this is bad. I gotta find something quick here."
Yeah, hard to get that bit right. But if you look back on that, I mean, you said you kind of glossed over your career to a large extent in UPS. You said you did some amazing things there and kind of started very much on the ground floor. But if you look back on that, to go back to that 18-year-old that was starting out in UPS, what advice, assuming that the 18-year-old would listen, but what advice would you give to that your 18-year-old self now?
Well, interestingly enough, the advice I received when I first started at UPS from my dad stuck with me throughout my career and my life today. And the two things he told me, he said the first thing was, whatever they ask you to do, say yes and thank you, and then learn your job and learn some more. And so that always stuck with me. And what I learned through that process was there were times throughout when UPS would tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, we've got this new responsibility for you. We've had this move for you. And I may have not have been felt ready, or maybe my confidence wasn't there. But I always heard my dad over my shoulder saying yes and thank you. So I'd say, yeah, okay, if you think I'm the right person. But what I learned from a leadership perspective was there are times when you have to believe in your people until they're ready to believe in themselves. And then you bridge that gap of confidence and knowledge until they're ready to believe in themselves. And they kind of get to that break even point where they're feeling good about themselves. And then that's when you step back as a leader and you let them fly, right? That's when you go from probably the person managing them and helping them to the cheerleader. You got this, keep up the good work. And so that was a lesson I learned. The advice, it's interesting. I get asked that question a lot now. I spend time at colleges and with seniors in high school, for example. And I always tell them, knowing what I know today, think of that word you want someone to use to describe you at the end of your career, whatever that word is. And, they'll give you some great adjectives. Some will say rich, some will say aggressive, energetic. For me, my word was thoughtful. I wanted to be considered a thoughtful leader. But if that's whatever word you pick as an 18-year-old going into the business world, if that's the word that you want on your tombstone at the end, then you really spend the rest of your career building that mosaic. So for me, thoughtful was I thought through the consequences. I thought through how my decisions have impacted not only our customers, but our people and our shareholders and stakeholders. So I wanted to be considered a thoughtful leader. And so I tell people all the time, think of that word you want someone to use to describe you at the end, and then you build that mosaic throughout your career. It's sort of your brand, I guess. That's your brand
Yeah.
identity.
But it's also, I mean, it's also very much about values, isn't it? Because I mean, what you're talking about there, I mean, thoughtful or whatever word you pick is really about what you value and how you perceive it. And I mean, I know that you've written a book called Tighten the Lug Nuts, which I want to come back to because I love the title. But I know that values are hugely important to you, and I'm just wondering, how do you kind of inculcate those values into your leadership and pass it on to others?
Well, I think it starts with this inventory that you do of yourself, and I think you do it personally and companies should do it as well. And that's that you have to answer three key questions. The first question is, who am I? The second question is, who am I? What do I stand for? And then what are the things I won't compromise? So who am I? What do I stand for? And what are the things I won't compromise? Now, if you think about it, take a company, for example, companies can articulate that all the time. Who are we? What do we stand for? It's number three that's always the one that gets you in a little bit of trouble, right? So if you think about companies that are in the news that got themselves in trouble, I'm sure if you and I were walking around the cafeteria, we'd see, value, mission statements. Who are we? What do we stand for? It's number three that gets people in trouble. It's the same as you as an individual. Who are you? What do you stand for? What won't you compromise? And you will get challenged on number three. What won't you compromise? And I think that's what's so important, because everything you do speaks. Your values, you walk your talk when you're walking around. People see you and they understand who you are. That's your brand. And the minute you break your brand promise, it's so hard to get that, so hard to rebuild that brand promise. It may take you years to get back from that one mistake that you make. And so I think that's the key, is who are you, what do you stand for, and what are the things you won't compromise through your journey as a leader. And certainly companies need to be able to articulate that to their people and be able to, kind of demonstrate it through their actions.
Yeah, because I mean, I always find, I mean, I know that it's, probably not necessarily fair, but if I go into an organization and I see mission statements and values up in the reception, I tend to kind of get a little bit of, not sure about that, because the organizations that do that, very often when you ask the people in the organization, well, what does that actually mean, or what does that stand for? They don't know the answer. And I think that's one part of it, but I think the other part of it is just what you're saying. is, and funny, I was having this conversation very recently with a client saying that, you know, everything matters, you know, in the sense of you're either adding or you're taking away. There's really nothing that is neutral. And, you know, if you say that you stand for something, but your actions don't, you know, flow from that, people get very disenchanted with you very, very quickly. And it's so hard to regain that lost ground because it's not, people don't necessarily judge you by what you say. Yes, okay, they take it in, but they judge you more by how you behave. And that's a big challenge for leaders, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And you have to walk the talk, but you set the tone from the top. You set the tone from your leadership. And it's the little things that count. I tell you, my dad used to always say to me, it's what you do when no one's watching that counts, right? And I used to always say to him, I go, Dad, you just ruined it. You know, no one was watching. That was supposed to be the good thing there. And he looked at me
Yeah.
and he said, two people are always watching, the man upstairs and the person looking in the mirror. And I think that that's how you really judge your success. It's not by a title that you receive, you get to, or maybe a level in an organization. It's, have you been true to yourself? Could you put your head on a pillow at night? And it's funny, it's the little things. I mean, at UPS, we have such a strong and safety culture. And, one of the things we always talk about is you back first. You always back in first because that's the best opportunity to understand the set of circumstances. And when you come out, things could have changed. Well, if you came in my house right now in my driveway, I back into my driveway. My wife backs into the garage. In the parking lot, we would walk around the parking lots at UPS, and anybody who wasn't backed in, we'd say, "What's going on here? You're supposed to back first." So I know that seems crazy and exaggerated, but those are the kinds of things. And the minute you don't do it, everybody says, I guess it must be okay now for us not to do it. Or you see a driver moving a vehicle just inside a building, doesn't put a seatbelt on. You have to be able to, at that moment, stop and say, "Hey, thanks for all you do on behalf of our company. You do a great job. Come put your seatbelt on. We want to make sure you get home and see your family tonight." And it's those little things, because the minute you don't say anything, you just silently sanction bad behavior. And as a leader, we're not allowed to silently sanction bad behavior.
You talk quite a bit about balanced leadership. What do you mean by balanced leadership?
Well, I think extremes are no good on any side, right? It's no different, in your life when you're doing things. So for me, it's balanced leadership thought and philosophy is that there are three key constituents in all the decisions that you make. It's your customers, your people, your share owners, and stakeholders. And so as you're making decisions, I think you have to think like a customer. You want to make sure your people feel like valued individuals, but you want to act like an owner in all the decisions that you make. A quick example would be, we've got a new product. We have a meeting, and someone brings forth a new product. Well, the BD person or the, marketing person, they've got like a deck of 700 pages to explain to me this new product and why it's positioned. And so the customer's represented and why the customer needs it. And of course, the CFO, he or she's sitting there banging on a calculator. Oh, at that price point, we can make money. So then my next question would be, okay, our customers are represented. Our shareholder stakeholders are represented. How about our people? Do our people understand why the product's important? What role they play in it? If there's a service disconnect, what training do they need? So I always pay particular attention to stay in balance, that our people, our customers, our shareholders, stakeholders are represented in our decision-making process. And then I always ask the last question. I look at the person presenting this new product or service or some change they want to make, and I look at them and say, "Hey, if this was your candy store, would you do it?" And I got to tell you, 20% of the times they say no. They
Really?
say to me, "Well, yeah." They say, "Well, no." I said, "Wait a second. You just presented this. You want me to do it?" "Well, you told me to bring us a new product. You told us we got to drive more revenue, so I thought this would be good, but I wouldn't do it if it was my dollar." Well, I got to tell you, then I'm not doing it either. But 80% of the time people and that shows you they're all in. Now, there's times that I'm not necessarily sure that's something we should do. But if it's not going to be hurtful to the organization, and if it fails, it's not going to be detrimental, then there's times when you have to go with your people. They're all in, they're focused, they're committed. They really have a clear understanding of why they want to do it. And maybe that's not exactly something I would do. I'd say, "Okay, well, look, if that's what you think, this is your baby, let's run. If you tell me you would write that check out of your personal checking account, let's do it then." So I think but that last question really makes the difference. If this was your candy store, would you do it?
Yeah, it's a great example of it. We were talking before we started the interview. We were talking about UPS and the entry into healthcare. And you were telling a story that I'd love you to repeat because it actually shows how how you really engaged your own people in the delivery and the development and the growth of that business. And I'd love you to repeat it because you had agreed a deal, which was the first deal, I think, if I understand correctly, in the with the pharmaceutical organization, and it was the approach that you were taking. So, would you mind sharing that story?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So, we were in all the other verticals, we're, automotive and high tech. And so our entry now was into the healthcare, and we were signing our first large healthcare customer was in, we were going to place them in Louisville, Kentucky. And the customer looked at me and says, everything looks good. We've got a facility. It's, compliance is all there. Here's my last question to you. My concern is that my 1,800 packages are going to get lost in the 14 million packages that you do a day at UPS. And I looked at him, I said, Gary, you don't have to worry about that because these aren't packages to us. These are patients. And so he looked at me and he said, you believe that? I go, absolutely. These are patients. And so our focus was to make sure that everyone inside our organization looked at every package as if it was a patient, get them a line of sight with the patient, and so they weren't picking an inanimate object. And so our training was, for example, when we brought his product in, we actually took his 2-day training that he had for his people inside his organization, and we gave it to our people. And then I said to him, would you be okay? Do you know people who use your product and you think they would be willing to address our people? And he said, yeah, of course. I know a couple. I'll talk to them. So sure enough, we brought in a couple people who used the product and they had them address our organization. So now you can just watch the face of those individuals as they're being addressed by someone who's going to use that product, why that product's so important. If it doesn't get here on the right day, because remember, if I'm at 99% on time at UPS or FedEx, pick a carrier, those are great numbers. Except when it comes to the healthcare side of the business, where you're going direct to a patient, you don't want to be the one patient that didn't get that product. So you really are at 100% because there's a person at the other end of that delivery. And so the goal was, how do we get a line of sight with our customer, with that patient? And so that was part of how we went about the training. Every time we added a new customer to the healthcare side of the business, we made sure we displayed the products, we took part of their training, and then if they were willing to work with us, then we brought in a patient who potentially used that product and have them do that. When I was in Southern California, I was trying to make a point with on the safety side of the business and how important it is that we are leaders in the safety side. And so I had a principal come in and address the drivers, and the principal basically said, hey, one thing is for sure, as a principal on the school, once I see the UPS driver, I know we're safe. And so every driver looked at their feet and they're like, okay. Now, if I tell them that, they're like, yeah, you're just trying to get us to do more, work harder, But when that principal looked at them all and said, hey, when you're on site, I know that my kids are safe. Right? That changed everything. And they were all good drivers. They had good safety frequencies. But the problem when you're really good is sometimes you could become complacent. I'm moving quickly, got that next delivery in mind. And the thing I wanted them to make sure they recognize is, hey, when you're on that school site or you're in that hospital property, there's a lot going on around you. You really got to be laser focused on, what's going on around you. But so I always feel like if you can get that line of sight with the customer, actually bringing a customer or having that customer talk, I think it goes such a long way. But that was our healthcare. And today it's the flagship of UPS supply chain is the healthcare side of the business. And they still do those things in every building you go in. It says, there's the mantra, these aren't packages, these are patients. And it's in every language in every country we're in.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It just reminded me, I was working with a client in the pharmaceutical industry there quite recently. And the particular group that I was working with, they were all research people. So, and they were saying that, they spend their whole time in labs and, testing on animals and mice and all sorts of things. But they said that one of the things that they found so incredibly profound was when this particular medicine that they were testing, when they actually brought a patient in who was suffering from the illness, and they said it just changed everything for them. Because now it was the proximity to the customer, just the very point that you're making.
Oh, it's amazing. You can just see people change completely. And some of the, You know how you have those individuals that, everything you say, they're rolling their eyes. Well, they don't roll their eyes when it's that patient in front of them, or in this case, that principal. But, you asked me a question in the beginning on my early days at UPS. There were so many things I learned starting from the bottom up. And one of the biggest lessons I learned was, so when I became a full-time supervisor inside UPS, I became a UPS driver, and I drove. And that lesson stuck with me forever. I loved being a driver, and I loved understanding the business right from doing it myself. From that moment forward, any new job I got, whether it's at UPS or the company I ran, first thing I did was go spend a day in the life of and try to, work that job. So for example, when they gave me as a direct responsibility, mailbox, etc., one of the first things to do was get an apron and go work a day in the store. When I took over the supply chain, I'm out there picking orders. Hey, how do we pick these orders? How does it happen? Let me understand this, pick the light. What happens is that, look, people understand that you're not never going to have their expertise. You're not going to be the expert that they are. But the fact that you're willing to try to understand that job from that ground level, that frontline level, speaks volumes of not only of who you are, but the respect that you give for them who are performing. They're executing the brand promise on behalf of our organization.
Yeah. I heard you talk in a short video clip, and I thought it was actually such a simple point, but I also thought it was very powerful. You talked about the combination and the lesson you learned about the combination of hard work and enthusiasm.
Well, it's funny because, to me, those are the hallmarks and cornerstones of who you are as a person: hard work and enthusiasm. Hard work without enthusiasm is just that, hard work gets old. And so you have to be enthusiastic. You have to, kind of, be that self-starter, self-motivated person, but you got to have fun at what you're doing. And look, let's face it, not every day is a great day. You're going to have your rough days. And people always say to me, I stayed at UPS for 36 years. Well, I didn't agree with everything that happened at UPS. I didn't disagree enough to leave.
Yeah.
And so I think that you generate that enthusiasm yourself, and then as the leader, part of your responsibility is to kind of create that enthusiasm with inside the organization. World-class teams find ways to not only, work well together, but have fun as they're doing it. And so I think that that's part of, what you do as a leader is set the tone and drive that. If I'm having fun doing my job, well, then everyone else seems to feed off of that. But if I'm that miserable person, oh, look, we've all worked for that individual who, how about when you're sitting in a meeting and they say something to you like, oh, you don't know how tough I got it. You know how tough my job is. Really? I mean, you got a pretty good job there. They're paying you some pretty good money. By the way, you volunteered for that job. You were excited when you took it. So no one wants to hear what your issues are. So part of what you do as the leader is drive that enthusiasm.
Yeah. I think also that, the work that you do, the work that I do, in organizations is about, helping teams to become high performing teams. And certainly I agree with you, kind of hard work and enthusiasm is part of that. But also the other side of that is that, operating within a high performing team, and let's be truthful, they're few and far between in many, many ways, a true highly performing team. But while they're a great experience if you're working in them, they're also challenging, because one of the clear traits of a high performing team is the fact that people hold each other accountable, and that mutual accountability can be demanding, because it's demanding of a high level of service and deliverability. And I don't know how often you've worked in high performing teams, but they are fantastic, but they are challenging, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. And if you think about it, true empowerment when people discipline themselves. So if you think about it from that perspective, they're more upset that they let you down or let the team down. So they place high accountability on themselves, and they place high accountability on each other because of the performance. They're disciplining themselves. And some people struggle with that. And so that's some of the difficulties in building these high performance teams, because what ends up happening is their peers hold them more accountable than you hold them accountable sometimes. And that's a difficult position to be in. And if you're not used to it, or you don't know how to handle it as one of the team members, it really becomes somewhat of an issue, because, as we said, true empowerment when people discipline themselves, and those high performance teams hold themselves and each other accountable to a very high level.
Yeah, and I think the flip of that is that in the high performing team, that people are also feel ownership in the development of each other. So they actually feel that they're actually part of growing and developing each other, which is really, really powerful. You coined a term, the tighten the lug nuts, and you've written a book about it. You might just explain exactly what you mean by that and what is the story that is in Joe Scafoni, isn't that correct? Was your
Yeah, Joe
character in the book?
Scafone.
Joe
Yeah, that's
Scafoni.
my guy, Joe
Um,
Scafone.
so maybe
So
tell the story of what you mean by tighten the lug nuts and what the message is there.
so so there's a story, there's a chapter devoted to how we came up with it. But in the short kind of example is that, when the lug nuts are loose, they're important. But when you don't tighten them and the wheels fall off, they become urgent. And in life, we can only handle so many urgent things. So don't allow important things like loose lug nuts when they're loose to become urgent, and then we get overwhelmed. And I think that's part of the problem. So I tell people all the time, tighten the lug nuts, you see them all the time. You get this email from a customer that asks you to follow up on something, you get distracted. Next thing you know, you've lost track of it, and now the customer 2 days later is calling and telling you, hey, if we don't get this fixed, I'm diverting. And now it's stopped everything, and then you'll have people say, I got no luck, I can't ever stay on plan. Well, you should have just tightened the lug nuts. They were important 2 days ago, and you could have fixed them quickly and effectively, but you let them go, and now the front wheel's off, and now all of a sudden now you got to stop everything. And so the real lesson is, don't allow important things to become urgent. Tighten the lug nuts.
So who's your book aimed at?
So for me, it's about this concept of leadership. However, for me, we're all leaders at one time or another. And so it's not specifically, it certainly would show up on a business, in the business section, but it really is about leadership. It's about values. It's about the way we conduct each other with each other and how we help each other. And I guess for me, it kind of gets summed up in this term legacy. I believe legacy is, do we leave things a little better than we found them? Are people better because of our time with us in business? Or are customers better because of their interaction with our company? Our share owner stakeholders, do they feel good about the fact that the company is in our hands? And so for me, that's what legacy is all about. And I'll give a quick example. If I'm doing a conference as a keynote speaker, and I asked a question to the audience, who is the state senator or who's the representative or who's a politician that represents you? Most people couldn't answer that question. But if I asked the question, who's that teacher that made a difference in your life? Everybody stops, tilts their heads. Fifth grade, Mr. So-and-so. Sixth grade, Mr. So-and-so. You're smiling because you're thinking of that teacher who made a difference in your life. And so by that extension, they left things a little better than they found them. That's legacy. And so teachers are leaders, although they wouldn't coin themselves as leaders because they don't have that title of CEO or manager. So the book is written in a way that all of us, as we're going through our routines and our lives, we have these different things that happen. We get new responsibilities, new jobs. There's a chapter on the 100-day plan. I have a new responsibility. Now I started a new job, or I'm part of a new team, part of a new association, part of the PTA, whatever. Maybe you want to lay out your 100-day plan. So the book can help all of us. Obviously, it's impactful for leaders that are in business, but I think I get a lot of teachers that'll email me, hey, I read the book. I think it's great. I understand it. There's things in here I could use. So it's really about being a good leader, which translates into being a good person, treating people with dignity and respect, and how you interact with each other.
It's interesting because I always think that, because I was smiling there when you were talking about the teachers. Because I was curious, I very often ask people the same question, and you do see people, as you say, tilting their head and smiling. And when you think about the teachers, and I know in my own case, if I think back to, a teacher that made a really positive impact upon me, they're not necessarily the most technically brilliant teachers, but they really had a passion for you, and they really had an interest in you, and they wanted to actually really share their knowledge, their expertise, whatever it might be, but it was done for you. And I always think that's so powerful when you think of it.
Oh, absolutely. And you're better because of your time with them. So that's a
Yes.
legacy, right? The other thing is, people always ask me, well, I'm not really a leader because I'm an individual contributor. No, you're a leader as an individual contributor, because you may be that person that's the subject matter expert in an organization. No one reports to you, but you're the best at what you do. Everybody comes over to you at some time or another, asks you a question. You probably have more influence over people inside the organization than anyone ever realizes because of your style and the way you go about doing it. But you're a leader because you leave things a little better than you found them.
Hmm.
And that's what's so important. That's what leadership is. It's that legacy of leaving things a little better than you found them.
Yeah, and leadership doesn't come with the title of manager.
No, absolutely
Yeah.
right. And I'll tell you what, I got the greatest title I've ever had in my whole life, Grandpa. Greatest title of all time. So I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I came across a great question recently about leadership, and I said it's not mine, so I'm not going to pretend that it is mine. But I just thought it was a great question, and it was to ask yourself: is it what is it about me that makes me a leader worth following?
Oh,
And
that's a great question.
and I think it's a great question to kind of ask and challenge yourself. And I think it is something that we all need to ask ourselves because so what is it about me that actually makes me worth following? Because, if you don't have followers, you ain't a leader, So
Well,
I think it's a great question.
well, it's interesting when we would sit and people would bring in potential promotion candidates. I would ask three questions, and one was similar to that, but I'd ask the three questions. And the first one, I don't mean it to be rude a little bit, but it starts off with the first question is, you bring Rocky Romanella to the meeting, and hey, I think we should promote Rocky. My first question was, well, if Rocky didn't come to work, would anybody notice? Now, most times people would say, yeah, of course they would. But every now and then you get that, well, no, not really. I think they would. It's like, all right. Second question is, what wouldn't happen? This is similar to the question you just asked. What wouldn't happen if Rocky wasn't here? Like, what's unique about Rocky? What's the difference that Rocky brings? What does he do? Like, what's in his brand, reputation, or brand that's different than anyone else? And if, that's sort of like what differentiates you from everybody else. And it's nice when someone says, oh, no, we would never have this way to talk to our people, or he's great with succession planning, or so what's that niche that makes you different? And then the third question is always, if we're sitting in a room of all equals, you have all of these managers that you want to promote now to this next level, and there was no one of authority in that room. It was just all peers, and something happened. Who would be the person that stands up and everybody follows them? And if it's not that individual, then maybe they're not ready because you are the next level before you are the next level. You're that informal leader before you get tagged to be the actual leader. And so if he or she is one of those informal leaders, and yeah, people would stand up and they would follow him or her, then they're probably ready for that next level. I think sometimes what happens is we want more for people than they want for themselves, right? So we identify this individual, we think they're the right person to lead the team, for example. But that's because we think that they're ready. We want more for them than they want for themselves. And so that's where you have to kind of match that. But when you ask that question, I always think back to that was question number two for me. If they think, what's uniquely there? What do they bring to the table? What differentiates them from everybody else? And
Yeah,
why would people lead them? That's a great question.
it is. Yeah, it's always kind of what piece of the jigsaw would be missing if they didn't turn up.
Yeah, that's
And
exactly that's a better way of putting it. Yeah.
yeah, and I think it is interesting. Rocky, listen, this has been fantastic. It has been great to do it. We could go on, but I want to respect your time. Question I ask everybody is a book other than your own that has made a significant impact upon you.
There's a great book out written by a gentleman named Dennis Snow, and it's called Lessons from the Mouse, and it's about his time at Disney. And Dennis does a great job with it, and he talks about this concept of everything we do speaks, and Disney does such a great job with that. He's got some great stories in there about his time at Disney. So I would say Lessons from the Mouse, and is a great book.
Okay, that's a new one. I haven't come across that before. Is that a recent book?
No, it's been out probably. Well, I saw him speak about 6 or 7 years ago. It's probably
Oh gosh,
10
that's not
years
nice.
now. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so
Another great book. Another great book, if you like coaching, is by legendary coach John Wooden. There's many books on Coach Wooden, and Coach Wooden just has a fantastic way of articulating this whole concept of hard work, enthusiasm, and the skills that you need. He builds this kind of pyramid of success. It's a great book.
yeah, I've come across his stuff before. He is fantastic. The other question I ask is that all successful people that I've interviewed and read about have their own rituals. They can be very varied, but they have their own rituals, and I'm just curious what yours are.
So for me, I get up early in the morning and I make sure I have that quiet time where I get, For example, when I was working more on a full-time basis, not, in the current scenario, I could be there 5:30 in the morning, and I made sure I have the time to take care of things. And the reason why I always wanted to get in early and take care of my emails and take care of any open items was I wanted the ability that when people came in to see me during the day, I had time to talk to them. And I think what happens is, so I wanted to clear everything out and make sure that if you walked in at 9 o'clock and you wanted to have a quick cup of coffee or talk to me about something, I had the time to do it. I didn't say, well, I got tied up. I got to read my email. So for my routine is to get up early, square everything away, make sure I'm in a good place, and then just hit the ground running from that perspective.
I love it. That's fantastic. Rocky, where can people get in touch with you and reach out and have a chat with you?
Well, thank you for asking. So my website is www. It's the number three and the word 60, SIXTY, managementservices.com. It's very interactive. I answer all of the, contact me and some questions that come up. And also, you can email me at Rocky, ROCKY, Romanella, my last name, ROMANDELLA, at gmail.com. And the book is sold on Barnes and Noble, and Amazon does a great job fulfilling. I'm self-published, so Amazon does a great job on the self-publishing side. And I also sign books. People email. I didn't realize people love signed books. I didn't think anything of it. So people email me, can you sign some books? So we kind of worked that all out too. So that's really a nice touch. So
Well, listen,
certainly do
I've
that.
no doubt that you'll get some requests from people from here listening to you to actually get more signed books and to have a chat with you. But listen, can I thank you for coming along today? It's been a real pleasure, a real joy, and I look forward, maybe hopefully we can do it again.
Well, it was an honor to be here. I love listening to your podcast. So for me to be on it was a thrill for me. So thank you very much for the opportunity to do this.
We'll talk soon.
Thank you, sir.